So this is my second video of the day, and it goes hand in hand, hand in glove with the previous one I did today on the hypostatic union. This one is the problem of the virgin birth. And I already had something written out a long time ago. I went back and made some clarifications, edited it by adding and subtracting a few things and changing the wording around to make things a little clearer. And I'm going to go ahead and read from it. And I'm also going to interject something towards, halfway through or maybe 3/4 in, that is quite relevant to one of my criticisms of Father Jacob's article that I responded to in my video, Why God is a Union of He and She. So I'm going to go ahead and start reading it. And then I'll interject at one point to discuss that. There is an insurmountable difficulty facing Christendom relative to the doctrine of the virgin birth. To be consistent, all Christians must ultimately adhere to the principle of total depravity in human nature. Orthodox chide Calvinists by arguing that if the human nature is totally depraved, the incarnation would have been impossible since Christ could not be tainted by sin. The problem is they, the Orthodox, commit the same offense. They may insist that men still have free will, but they also insist that the human nature is ultimately irredeemable apart from the incarnation of Christ. They cope with this problem by saying that the incarnation recapitulated Adam and occurred before the foundation of the world. That doesn't solve it, however. If man's nature never became cursed and irredeemably depraved post-fall, what need would there have been for a sacrifice? But if he was, then the Logos certainly could not have assumed flesh without entangling himself in sinful flesh. The same problem Calvinism has. So the Christian doctrine of the Trinity is false. A divine hypostasis did not need to become incarnate. And here is where I'm going to stop myself. A divine hypostasis not only did not need to become incarnate, he could not have become incarnate. See my last video, but I'm also going to add to that. Recall, if you read Father Jacob's article, and the quote that I responded to from the article, that he believes there is this unbridgeable separation or chasm between God, the being of God, and the ex nihilo creation of the world by God. He's so worried about the binary being destroyed that he has posited an absolute binary, which can't admit of a reconciliation between the two, since there's no ontological ground or starting point or commonality between them. So how can you ever reconcile it? By simply positing that God became man? Well, no, that doesn't reconcile it at all. If the gap is unbridgeable, and if God is eternal, and there is no sense at all in which his creation is eternal because it appeared out of nothing, it literally came from nothing. See, this is where they equivocate. Did the world come from nothing, or did it come out of God? If it came from God, if it flowed from God, then it didn't come from nothing. If it came from nothing, then it has an absolute, its own absolute autonomous existence and being. The problem with that is that you now have two absolute eternal beings. You have God and then his creation. And the creation has now been granted a kind of autonomous status relative to God. So now you have these two co-eternal entities. I don't know how you resolve that. I don't know how they could possibly resolve that. But I'm waiting for an answer to that too. I've discussed this with a number of people, and I've not heard an answer that can resolve the dilemma there. Going on from there, God becomes incarnate through the cosmos. The divine hypostasis did not need to become incarnate. God becomes incarnate through the cosmos, through nature. God has a spiritual body which becomes manifest in the material world. The doctrine of the virgin birth is an exercise in mental gymnastics. It is designed to make two contradictory claims at once. One, the Son really truly took on human, i.e. sinful nature. But then again, two, not really, because he took flesh from a woman without the seed contribution of the male. So he is truly, but not actually, a descendant of Adam. There are only two options. Either Christ merely appeared to be in the flesh, Docetism, or he became the human nature that requires redeeming, in which case he entangled himself in sinful flesh. The contradiction then filters down to the most mundane level of the Christian apologetic. Christians argue on the one hand that since Christ was truly human, he took on the weaknesses of the flesh, including things such as hunger, thirst, and pain. But since he is supposed to be a divine member of the Holy Trinity, he is not intrinsically mortal, and therefore his death was purely voluntary. Did you catch the difference there? They cannot seem to decide whether Jesus experienced the curses of the flesh naturally, by virtue of being human, or whether he is subject to those things on a purely voluntary basis, due to the divinity allowing himself such experiences. But you cannot parcel out these experiences in such a fashion. He either experienced every single one of them by virtue of the nature he shared with Adam, or he did so because he chose to experience them while in the flesh. If the former, he was subject to mortality inherently and no different from us. If the latter, he is incapable of redeeming us, since he is incapable of assuming the fullness of our nature. I have heard it nuanced that Jesus had a body like Adam's before the fall, in that it was sinless, but also like unto Adam's in its grosser post-fall corporeal state. But this is no solution at all. We have already shown that unless Jesus took on the weakness of the flesh, due to his truly being one with Adam by nature, he cannot redeem Adam. You would have to see the two, and what was I trying to say here? There's like a typo here. Let me try to figure this out. You would have to see the two types of bodies, pre-fall and post-fall, as radically separated by sin, one full of divine grace and the other depraved. Also, there is this tidbit. How did Jesus have 23 chromosomes if no man was involved in his conception? He is not truly a man. The assumption of virgin birth is necessary implies that the seed itself is sinful, which leads to my final point. If creation has been cursed by being separated from God, how is it that it still exists if we were separated from the uncreated divine energy that is supposed to be the very means of union with God?